Hello, and welcome to Mystic Dog Mama, the podcast for soul led dog mamas, where you'll discover how to best nourish your dog and yourself, mind, body, and soul. I'm your host, Dr. Alexia Miller. Thank you so much for joining me today on this very special mini-sode all about the Lion's Gate. So, if you're not familiar with the Lion's Gate, this is a period of time that spans from the end of July till around mid-August every year. It's considered a kind of portal of sorts, where energy opens up, where we have access to more of ourselves that exist beyond the veil, if you will, and that we're able to set our intentions and manifest things into our lives that we want to see. But I actually think this is just a really special time of the year that goes well beyond trying to bring things into our reality, but it's really an opportunity for diving into self-compassion and self-inquiry. And so I kind of wanted to pop on and offer this other kind of perspective around the Lion's Gate, as well as the fact that it has such a strong connection to dogs, and you'll see why in a second. So, that period of time that I just described between the end of July and mid August is when the star Sirius, which is in Orion's belt, aligns with our sun and becomes visible to us. So, Sirius is the brightest star in the sky, and it's actually considered a spiritual sun. It's also known as the dog star because it's the alpha star in the Canis Major constellation. It's called the Lion's Gate, though, because this happens every year in the sign of Leo, and it peaks today on the 8th. So we always have this repetition of 8-8. And if you're into numerology, this represents abundance, manifestation, fortune, bringing what you want into the world. It's considered a really auspicious time in many different cultures across time, actually, because even in ancient Egypt, this was the time that the Nile would flood. And so it was seen as really auspicious for bringing fertility and harvest. So it's kind of an exciting time to talk about. I also thought it was interesting because this morning I was doing my kind of daily tarot practice. I think I've mentioned before in the podcast that I often use tarot as a tool for self inquiry, not so much for kind of quote unquote divination, how we kind of think of like fortune tellers, but more that it's this opportunity to look at the different archetypes that we experience in our lives and ask ourselves, what is the deeper wisdom that we can be learning at any given time? And as I was playing around with the tarot and realized again, oh my goodness, it's Lionsgate, something that came to mind was the image of the strength card in the traditional Rider Waite tarot. This is not the traditional Rider Waite. This is the Mystical Moments tarot, which is just beautiful, but it has a similar kind of image. The strength card, sorry, it's a glossy card, and so the ring light's going to pick it up. There we go. The strength card always depicts, or in the traditional card it depicts, and in this one it depicts a woman who is taming a lion. And what she's doing, though, is actually taming it through her compassion, through this sense of gentleness. And there are various interpretations of what this means. Some people feel like it indicates our need to kind of control our own internal desires, our own inner passions, kind of temper them, you know. But for me, it really is about the inner strength that we all have, and that it is actually a gentle strength. So rather than like an aggressive kind of strength, pulling on, pulling up from and on that part of us, that deep part of us that really is connected to our higher wisdom. And I thought that's just sort of perfect for Lionsgate, as well as the fact that it's got a lion on there. But I also couldn't help but bring out the Fool card. This is from another deck of mine. This, I think it's the Pagan Underworld is called, or Otherworld, Pagan Otherworld. The Fool card in the traditional Rider Waite deck depicts a court jester who's about to jump off a cliff, like this one is too, with a white little dog. And if you've listened to some of my earlier episodes where I talk about how Lucky came into my life, I very much associate Lucky with the little white dog by the Fool's feet. That was very prominent for me. It was an image that was very prominent before he came into my life. And so this always makes me think of Lucky and the importance of the dog, and the dog accompanying us through these challenging times through the wheel of life, because the tarot is very much about the archetypes of the whole wheel, the cycle of life, and the various things that we go through. And I love that you'll have heard me talk about with Sarah Verba in one of my earlier episodes. If you've not listened to it, you can go back and listen to it. But she and I were talking about the imagery and the archetype of the dog in the tarot, and how in many respects the dog is accompanying us in the tarot in the same way that the dog accompanies us through our lives, of being this kind of support and sacred mirror who is allowing us to experience the fullness of ourselves on this journey of life. So I thought it was just sort of perfect that the dog is so linked to Lionsgate and what this time actually means. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the archetype of Leo. And if you're into astrology, and I should say I'm not an astrology expert by any means. In fact, I know just basically the basics. I can never tell you what's really going on at any particular time, but I am really tuned into these particular moments, like the solstice, like the equinox, like Lionsgate, because I feel like these particular moments offer us kind of stopping points throughout the year where we can be still and reflect and ask ourselves the important questions about how it is that we want to go forward, to reflect on how we have been throughout the year and what it is that we would like to create and who we would like to become in the next stage. So I think those moments of pause and inner dialogue are so important. So today represents one of those times. So the archetype of Leo is often given the stereotype of being like very loud, very extroverted, demanding all the attention. There's a lot of that kind of assumption around Leo energy. But something that Sarah Verba brought up in one of her more recent videos on Leo that I thought was just such a great reminder too, is about how Leo asks each and every one of us, whether you're a Leo sun or not, or whether Leo is prominent in your natal chart, doesn't matter. We all have Leo in our chart. That really one of the gifts of this archetype is to look at how we can better live from the heart. And this is something that I feel like dogs are absolutely here teaching us. They are so heart centered. That is, they have the biggest heart of any animal per body size. And they also, their energy is just so heart based, and it's why we are drawn to them. And so, this kind of collision for me of the dog star being in Leo, and Leo really asking us to investigate what it means for each and every one of us to live from the heart, because that will look different for all of us. But it's an opportunity to really look at how can we become more heart-based? How can we be living our day-to-day lives much more from our hearts? And our dogs offer us a really lovely model for doing that. So as we reflect upon these astrological or seasonal moments, that offers an opportunity to stop and revisit with a different lens our own life's journey, we get to become more curious about who we are and who we're growing into. And this is actually something I do with Lucky as well. I apply that same lens to him. I'm curious about how he's developing and changing. I do my best to remain present to what is actually going on with him at any given time instead of keeping past assumptions on him. And that has really helped our relationship, I feel, because we are continually developing with one another. And rather than me staying stuck in how he used to be, I get to see those small moments of change, like when he might not react to something in the same kind of way, or where he was willing to go in the water a little bit more deeply than he normally does, and how that was such a big thing for him. I think it's just a great reminder that as we are able to do that for ourselves, we can do it for our dogs. And as we do it for our dogs, we're able to do it for ourselves. So it's that lovely cycle that kind of goes back and forth. So, like I said, much of what you will find out there on Lionsgate really does focus on abundance and how you can manifest things into your physical reality. And I think this is fantastic if that feels resonant to you. But I'd also like to add something, or maybe even an alternative to the whole manifesting kind of culture, in case that doesn't sit well with you, because I think there's such magic in this particular moment. So I've come up with a few questions that I'm asking myself for Lionsgate that I thought maybe I would share with you and see if they were helpful for you. So I say take what resonates for you and abandon what doesn't. But just in case this is helpful for you and kind of using the energies of today, continuing until mid-August, how that might offer you a different lens on yourself. Okay, so the first question that I'm asking myself, and I'm inviting you, if you feel comfortable, to ask yourself is, how am I being asked to show more compassion for myself in my life? And what are some small, regular practices that I can do to cultivate that self compassion and demonstrate to myself that I'm prioritizing myself? This actually links to what I was talking about with intuition in the first summer series episode, that if we want, so in the case of intuition, if we want to further develop our intuition and come into more of a relationship with our intuition, we have to actually demonstrate that we are listening to it. So you get an intuitive hit, and then you follow through with it in an action in the 3D world. And then what you'll start to see is that you will get bigger intuitive hits on bigger things, and it will become more regular in your life. And I feel the same thing for self-compassion. What are some small, simple things that we can be doing that demonstrate that we're offering ourselves that same sense of mercy, of forgiveness, of love and compassion and acceptance that many of us are so quick to offer to everyone else, but we need to turn that back onto ourselves as well. And what does that look like in a very practical way for you? So, what's something small that you can be doing? And the more you do those small things, it accumulates and bigger things become easier to do. So, the second question that I'm asking is, how can I cultivate deeper feelings of expansion in my life, regardless of my current circumstances? This has been a big one for me lately. I don't know if it has for you. I feel like in my individual life, I've got a lot of constriction that I'm kind of feeling. There's a lot of change going on for me. There's a lot of uncertainty in my personal life. But I feel like that is also echoed and is being echoed by what's going on at a global scale, that this is something that we're experiencing collectively. And so one of the kind of practices that I've been embedding for myself in a more regular basis is really looking at, how do I cultivate that feeling of expansion despite what it is that I'm experiencing? So I can experience, I can see, I can witness, I can be in what's in my life, but how can I still be in a space of peace and hope and expansion? And that has been really huge for me to move through the things that I'm going through in my own life, but also to come into a different relationship with feeling more empowered in what is going on at a collective level as well, versus feeling hopeless and distraught and like, oh my God, the world is ending. But actually, cultivating, it's very much an inside job. It's what I was talking about with my friend Mariana Quintero in our episode. And also, I was talking about it with Elizabeth Ann Hill, of really doing that inner work of cultivating the feelings that you want to feel. And that doesn't last forever. I have to be totally transparent with that. It's not like I live in this like perfect, happy, blissful state all the time. But I have to say, compared to even a few years ago, I am much more regularly in that state as I do these kinds of check ins and ask myself, how do I cultivate that feeling of expansion? What would feel expansive to me in this moment? And that will look different from day to day. That will look different from moment to moment. So, if that feels right for you, how can you cultivate deeper feelings of expansion in your life? The third question I'm asking myself and inviting you along with me is, how can I hold more space for all of my feelings, including the big ones? And how can I do the same for my dog? This is a big one because if you're anything like me, I tend to not really like having those negative feelings around and can kind of judge myself and want to get through them as quickly as possible because they're uncomfortable. But the more that I have been consciously and constantly permitting myself and in fact inviting myself to bring these big emotions to the table and welcome them to the party, welcome them into my life without kind of fear that they're going to take over and then I'm going to get consumed by them, the more that I think those parts of myself that were so longing to be heard finally feel heard. And then it actually quiets down. And it reminds me, it's not exactly the same thing, but it does remind me of experiences that I've had when I've done shamanic journeying, where, and you might have heard of the term soul retrieval, where a shamanic practitioner will help you to kind of identify parts of yourself that you have allowed to splinter off, oftentimes during trauma, difficult periods in our life, and it's a form of self-preservation. But for me, when I do this for myself, so I'm not reliant upon going to a practitioner to help me with this, although I think that is really great if that's something that you want to do, and I encourage you to explore that. But this is something that we can be doing for ourselves on a regular basis, of inviting back those feelings and inviting back those parts of ourselves that splintered off when we had these feelings, or when the parts of ourselves that we kind of shut away. The more we become our truer selves, the more we become whole, the more we are so much more compassionate for ourselves and our dogs. And again, relating this back to the dogs, I have made a really conscious effort, as particularly when it comes to Lucky's reactivity and the different behaviors that I have found triggering in the past, when I can just be there as a soft witness. And I'm saying this like in times where it's not like a dangerous situation. So there's no need to actually um kind of intervene in the situation necessarily, like because of safety reasons, but just some things he'll do that he'll be a little bit triggered and I'll be a little bit triggered. And it used to be that we were really feeding off of one another, because I was in such a dysregulated state with my own nervous system. But as I've been consciously working with regulating my own nervous system, he co-regulates to me. So I've noticed that when I'm in those places, even when we're out, even in a situation actually that could potentially become more dangerous, I've noticed that particularly recently when we're out on the dog walk and there are a bunch of off-leash dogs that come out of nowhere, because generally I avoid those kinds of situations, but sometimes you can't help it. It just sort of happens. I used to freak out as soon as I saw it. As soon as I saw them approaching, and he would start freaking out as well, even if he couldn't see the dogs, because he was picking up on the fact that I was alerted to danger. And the more that I have consciously chosen to regulate myself and chosen to tell myself that I can handle this situation and remain calm so that I can think through those situations rather than operating from a kind of fight or flight perspective, the better he handles those situations, like 9 times out of 10. So again, how can we make space for our feelings and our dog's feelings? Okay, number 4. This is a this might seem a little bit odd in a sense, but I kind of wanted to bring this to your attention too, because it's something that I've been thinking about quite a bit lately. And it's this idea of the comfort zone, and how we're so often told that we need to leave our comfort zone. You need to get out of your comfort zone. And I've really been playing around with that because there's something kind of fundamental about that that doesn't feel right for me. And I'm going to explain why. Because I actually feel like when we're referring to the comfort zone in the way that we are referring to it traditionally, we're actually talking about complacency. That we talk about needing to go beyond what we're comfortable with, but it's really about what have we become complacent with. Because I think, especially in a culture that is so highly dysregulated, where we are living in a time and a space that just feels like we're constantly in this fight or flight. I think many of us have experienced various levels of trauma. Our nervous systems are constantly dysregulated. We're constantly expected to be on call all the time. And especially in this sort of like immediate gratification culture where we're getting notifications on our phones all the time, like we are constantly on, whether or not we necessarily are conscious of that. And so I think at a deep core level, we actually are really seeking out some spaces of comfort because we don't have them. And I think that comfort, spaces of comfort, are so important for us to be able to come back into regulation. So I'm going to actually argue that you find a comfort zone, whether that's a physical location, that's people you can be around, it's a community, it's activities that you do, it's routines that you create, whatever works for you, and any combination of them that actually allows you to embrace comfort, to explore what being comfortable looks and feels like. Because I've had this situation, and I wonder if you guys can relate, where if I'm asked the question like, well, what do you really want, kind of thing, I noticed that particularly in the past, I've gotten much better with it more recently, but particularly in the past, I really struggled with articulating that because I was coming from a survival mindset. I didn't know really what it felt like to be comfortable. And again, this is regardless of the circumstances that I'm in, but more this personal space of regulation. And I noticed that in those kinds of states where I've been really dysregulated, when I've had to make decisions, they're very much fear-based decisions, even if they seem like the right thing on paper. They're coming from a fear base. And I noticed how desperately I was craving spaces of comfort where I could just be, where I could allow my nervous system to settle. And so that's where I'm arguing for find our comfort zones. Again, it's a different thing from complacency where we just get kind of like, meh, I'm not really interested in doing anything because that just seems like too much effort. But I think when we create the comfort zones and we can really regulate our systems, we are much more likely to go and do things that scare us a little bit, that do push our edges, that do ask us and allow us to step into a newer version of ourselves. But we have to have that regulated nervous system first. So that's where I'm prioritizing that. Okay, and now number 5, this links to what I was just talking about. One of the things that I've actually found really helpful for kind of constantly re-engaging with my nervous system to create that space of regulation is actually borrowed from 2 of the 5 Reiki precepts. And so whether or not you're a Reiki practitioner doesn't matter. There are these 2 precepts that I think are really helpful. And as Reiki practitioners, we are meant to be using these precepts to guide our lives, and I think everyone would benefit from using these precepts. And we're asked to start the day by reciting them and to end the day by reciting them as well. And anytime we become kind of dysregulated, where we get sucked into the 3D throughout our day, reminding ourselves of these precepts. So the 2 that I really want to talk about are, and they always start with just for today, which I love because it's such a permission giving experience. It's not asking you to try to do this forever. It's being realistic with like, is it possible just for today? And if you want to modify it to like, just for this moment, like really bringing it into the present. Just for today, I choose to not be angry. And just for today, I choose not to worry. And I think those things are so important. They have been for me, where I realize once I get on the worry bus, it's like being on the struggle bus. It's really hard to get off. My mind just goes down all of these possibilities and I feel paralyzed. Whereas when I recite these, when I remind myself of these precepts and I feel like, is it okay? Can I allow myself to let go of the worry just for a moment? And feel that sense of peace that starts to come over me. This links, the reason that we do it in Reiki is when we talk about healing in a Reiki context, Reiki looks at healing. We cannot heal another person or another thing. And this relates as well to how even medications function. It's not the medications that are actually healing the body. It's that the medications, the Reiki healer, any modality healer, what they are doing is creating the appropriate context for you to heal yourself. You are healing yourself, not the healer healing you. But similar to what I was talking about with Lucky co-regulating with me, if I, as the energy worker, the Reiki practitioner, and I'm doing a session with you, when I'm using these precepts to guide my life and especially to guide a session, and I get myself into that super calm state where I am totally aligned with Reiki energy, which, if you're not familiar with what that is, it's life force energy, universal life force energy. I become so in tune with that, that you on an unconscious level start co-regulating with me. And so you become in that peaceful state. You become in that calm state where your body can start to heal, mind, body, and soul levels. So I found that those precepts, those 2 precepts of just for today, I choose not to worry, and just for today, I choose not to be angry. are really great guiding principles for all of us for kind of reconnecting with ourselves, to come back into that heart space, to create that sense of expansion that we often associate with abundance, right? Like oftentimes we're calling in these things into our lives when we're setting intentions because we want to feel a particular way. It's the feeling that we really want. And you can create that for yourself right now, regardless of what you see around you. So I just wanted to offer that if that feels resonant for you, to take those precepts and use that maybe as like a mantra or an affirmation or a check-in for yourself throughout your day to create more of that sense of abundance, expansion, and freedom and living from the heart that I feel like this particular period of time is just absolutely about. Okay, so that's basically it. That's really what I wanted to talk to you about today. I hope that this was helpful. And if you decide to sit with any of these questions yourself, or you decide to use the precepts as a kind of guide, maybe for a meditation or an affirmation or a mantra, like I said, I'd love to hear about it. I'd also love to hear if you have any particular practices that you love to do for Lionsgate. So let me know. Send me a DM on Instagram at Mystic Dog Mama and let me know and I'll respond to you. All right. I'm wishing you a very happy and expansive Lionsgate. And until next time.